That's right, the chambers are back in my crosshairs, and today I want to prove a point that this raid can be completed in the most random and super not optimal gear, if you know the correct strategies, that is. I want to take in gear bad enough that I wonder if a solo deathless completion is even possible. So here are the 3 sets that I'm going to be taking in for the solo challenge. Obviously, starting with gear set 1, we are going to be warming up to the raid again and set a baseline of how fast I can do the raid with my current skill using some of the best gear in the game. Gear 2 is actually the setup I used when I first learned how to do the raid in groups. If not, this setup is actually a little worse. And finally, we have the big challenge, this beast of a setup. Is it possible for me to complete the raid with this setup without dying? I have no idea, and that's going to make this challenge very fun. Speaking of the challenge, we should make a couple things pretty clear. I have a pretty good level of experience in solo raids, to the point where I can complete most other rooms without a lot of mistakes, which is a big factor to making this even possible. Second, we are going to be doing normal raids today. Challenge mode COX is hard enough even with my normal setup, and I don't have 3 hours to attempt this challenge with the worst setup that I plan to showcase, so we're just sticking to normal layouts today. I'm also a max combat account, which is important to keep in mind as combat levels matter a whole lot more than gear setups, so if I inspire you to take on this challenge with an account with lower stats, your experiences may vary. And finally, I am going to be scouting some easier layouts when I take in the lower gear. Scouting is part of this raid, and I might as well make the most of it. That and taking on Vasa or Vespula with only a rune crossbow sounds like absolute torture. So let's jump into things, starting out with the max setup. I'm rocking an almost max mage setup with the Shadow, a fairly high level setup with the Scythe for melee, and of course taking in an almost max range set with the T-bow. I will also be taking in the dragon equipment as needed for rooms like Guardians and Mutadiles for all of these runs. Starting off simple, we have the Shaman room, and thanks to a very nice layout, we're able to safe spot these guys, making this room an absolute breeze. Thieving is next, which is incredibly boring to watch, so we're going to skip right on over to Mystics. Like all the Mystic rooms, the first thing I do is to try to get them to melee me, so I can corner trap them later and not have to deal with all 3 of them constantly sending attacks my way. Another simple room to say the least. Guardians are next and are by far one of, if not the easiest room to complete in the chambers, so with a few whacks of the pickaxe, this room is nothing special. Finally, we finish off the floor with Tightrope, which again is one of the easiest rooms to complete, even if you do the room like I do and kill everything in sight. With a quick prep, it's finally time to take on the big man himself, Olm. And I'm not very good at the Shadow method, and I'm still learning the Scythe walk, so yeah, there were a lot of mistakes in this. And when it came down to the final phase, things got a little rough. Yeah, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign at all. Ooh. Ooh, that's rough. Yeah, that was painful to watch even for me. Regardless, we're going to be moving right along into the next setup, the Elite Void setup. The beauty of this gear is the lack of switches. Going in with the ACB in the Ruby Bolts, Anguish, Crystal Shield, and the Ring of Suffering for the range setup. For Mage, we're rocking a Helm Switch, of course, followed by the Occult, Imbued Magic Cape, and the Toxic Trident. Finally, we have the melee setup, and we are going to have the final Helm Switch, the Amulet of Torture, the Infernal Cape because I can't be bothered to get yet another Fire Cape, and finally the Tentacle Whip. The last thing I'm going to be bringing in that's worth some note is the Dragon Warhammer, making this entire set roughly 150 mil, not including untradables, so let's round this out to 180 mil just to be more on the safe side. Scouting out yet another simple raid, here is the inventory that I'm going to be walking in with. Dragon Pick for Guardians, Axe for the Mutadile Tree, and the Salve Amulet for the Mystics. Filling in the rest of the inventory with 4 stamina pots and the rest brews and restores, bringing in 4 stamina potions just because I'm afraid that Ulm is going to take quite a while, and running out of stam there is never a fun time. First thing I did in this raid was actually get all the secondaries, pretty much right off the bat because I got a really funky layout and this was just the easiest time to do it. The first room that I actually took on though was Guardians. And yeah, even with lower gear, this is still boring to watch, so we go over to the Mutadile. This room is notorious for destroying supplies, but honestly, I was really surprised by this setup. It's been a very long time since I've seen the Elite Void gear, and it really did not disappoint me. Finishing this room off with only 1 brew gone and 2 sips of a super restore, which is insane to me. Making the most of the overloads and the prayer enhance, next room was Ice Demon, which took way longer than I was expecting for this puzzle room. Walking back and forth here for an eternity is just as boring as it was doing it as it is watching it, so let's go ahead and skip over to Tightrope. Like I did with the set beforehand, we are going to kill everything in this room, and it took way less damage than I was expecting again. For me to only lose 3 brews here is fantastic in my book. Up next was Tecton, and being an absolute idiot like I am, I sent both of my specs in the Ice Demon room, so a lot of zeros were going to be hit before my spec recharged enough for me to send my one and only D-Warhammer attack. For what it's worth though, this room was not nearly as bad as I thought. While Tecton going back to his anvil 3 times is nothing close to fast, I was expecting this room to take so much longer. The final room was Mystics, and we took them out the same way as the max setup. Get them all to melee me, corner trap them, and kill them with range. Void again really surprised me here. Even though this setup is known to just increase accuracy, I was also expecting this room to take a lot longer. So with them knocked out, that just leaves prep and Ulm left to do. I was honestly super excited to go back to my old methods. While Shadow and the Scythe absolutely destroys, there is something so satisfying about the 3-0 at Mage and the 4-1 at Melee. With that said, I was unbelievably impressed with the damage output with the Void setup. Even with missing a Dragon Warhammer spec on one of the melee hands, it was actually kinda rare for me to see 1 or 2 zeros during the entire cycle. It went so well in fact that I started the final phase of Ulm with like 90% of my supplies that I walked in with, ending the entire run with honestly a very respectable time of 42 minutes and 3 seconds. Just for fun, I'm throwing up all of the times for each room so you too can see how well this set performed. Alright, it's time for the big one, or should I say the really budget one. While you may be able to complete the run with lower gear than this, I question if you even want to. Starting off with an absolute classic of a melee setup, we have the Nezi Helm, Glory, Fighter Torso, Rune Plate Legs, Dragon Boots, Barrows Gloves, Berserker Ring, a normal whip, Crystal Shield, Infernal Cape, and Ruby Bolts. I mean, it doesn't get more classic than this, and this is actually where a majority of the money for this setup is at. For the Mage switch, we have the normal Trident of the Seas and a Black Mystic set, which is more expensive than the normal set, but looks a whole lot better with the imbued Zamorak cape. And finally, for the range setup, we're rocking the old reliable Rune Crossbow and Black Dragon gear. The last thing to note is, of course, the spec weapon, which I'm bringing in the Arclight. I have very little hopes of this thing actually doing anything in the raid, but that's what I'm going to be taking in. For those who don't know, this special attack consumes 50% of the spec bar and has a chance to lower the opponent's strength, attack, and defense levels by 5% plus 1. So even if it does hit, it's not going to be doing a whole lot. But with that said, and if I include the full inventory of brews and restores, this setup costs less than 10 mil. Again, you probably could take in more of a budget setup, but why would you want to? With an incredibly easy layout like this, I'm actually pretty excited to get this started. Starting off with Vanguards, a room that's notorious for me dying in, or at least destroying my food supplies. Maybe it was just the old school gods laughing at me or something, but this room actually went rather well. I only lost 2 brews and a full restore, and yeah, I did forget to fill up my inventory after pre-potting, so whoops. Thieving was next, which was actually super nice for me as I hunted down the bats, which gave me a very easy option to heal back up after drinking an overload from the Vanguards. With Thieving done, we are back at the Mystics for the final time in this video, stacking them up once again and sending Ruby Bolts their way. This took an eternity to complete, like you can imagine, so onto the actual scary room of the entire layout, Tecton. The Zero Machine, which is to be expected in this gear. The good news is, after a few anvil trips, I was able to maintain more damage than he was healing up, so it was just a matter of time. His route to not take damage is not too horrible to learn, making this essentially a zero supply room if you have enough run energy. Crabs are last, and of course are boring, so on to prep and Ulm. If I've learned anything in this video, defense lowering specs are not a big deal at all in this raid, if you scout layouts like I do. While Tecton and melee hands saw an unbelievably high number of zeros, as long as you had time and stamina potions, you can just brute force it like I did. I also learned that the Shadow method is incredibly nice, but I'm definitely not going back to it. The 3-0 mage route is way safer and in my opinion easier to do, and if you have the Sanguinesti staff, you heal just an absolute ton of health back. The real scary part of this run comes down to 2 things. First, being able to kill the hands within the time slot. I was rather dumb here and killed off the mage hand first because I got distracted by running out of overload. And yeah, don't do that. Things can get very bad very quickly. But I was able to take out the melee hand in time, and the final phase started up with almost 4 full doses of brew and plenty of restores. So let's see how this played out. On Ruby Bolts. Yes! Oh, that's huge. It saves so much. Do it again. Yes! Yes! They do work. Yeah, we see 3. Oh, it's so nice. Yes, we did it. We did it. 47 minutes. Oh, in this gear. Woo! Under an hour's worth of time, we are able to complete it. Ooh, that's insane. White lights as far as the eye can see, which I expected. So I guess it is possible to complete the chambers with some horrific budget gear, if you're patient enough and the RuneScape gods shine some light upon you. On screen, we have both runtimes for each of the budget setups, which I think is pretty interesting. With that said, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it does mean the absolute world to me. Until we see each other again, I hope everyone's having a fantastic day. Good luck on your grinds and your personal goals, and I hope to see you again very soon. Stay inspired.